Hey everybody, TacticAngel. We're playing Legends on a PlayStation and all of that. Back for another premium ship review. This time we'll be looking at the Tier 7 German destroyer ZF-6. For this review we'll start with some history, move into analysis, discuss your commanders, run down the stats, and then we'll finish off with some gameplay. But if you do want to jump around at all, you should see some time codes down in the description. The story of the ZF-6 begins with the development of a new high-speed destroyer for the French Navy. In the 1930s, the French began work on the Dunkirk class of battleships. Since these capital ships were designed to reach a speed of 30 knots, France thought it ought to be a good idea to have destroyers capable of, keeping up with those fast battleships. Now, most of the French destroyers in service at that time would nominally reach this, with the Bourrasque and Le Droit class being able to hit 33 knots, and some ships like the Jaguar or Chacal class of contre-torpillerie being able to hit over 36 knots. In general, the service speeds of these ships were more realistically 30 knots for the smaller destroyers, and though the Jaguars could zip around at a sustained speed near 35 knots, it was expensive in terms of fuel, and the French were looking to design a ship that was of a smaller and, dare I say, normal destroyer weight, something more in the 1,100 to 1,200 ton range, which was a bit more than half of the weight of these large Jaguar-type contre-torpillerie. It was felt a ship that could reach 38 knots and sustain around 34 would give a destroyer a respectable enough speed advantage that it could reliably keep up with these new battleships, as well as, very importantly, provide enough speed and firepower to compete with the relatively recently created Navigatori class of Italian destroyers. In total, 12 L'Adi class destroyers were laid down, 6 were completed and commissioned into service with the French Navy. 4 were launched but not completed during the war, and of these 10 ships, the majority of them joined the list of ships sunk more than once during World War II, with the vast majority of those having been scuttled multiple times. The remaining 2 ships in the class were named L'Opiniâtre, which basically means the stubborn, and the L'Aventurier, which is the adventurer. They were both captured by the Germans while still under construction in 1940, after the fall of France. They were renamed the creative German designations ZF-6 and ZF-7 respectively. The plan was to complete these ships where they were being constructed in Bordeaux, and due to sabotage and material shortages, ZF-6 would eventually be redesignated ZF-2, with parts of ZF-7 being cannibalized for use in ZF-2, but to no avail. Even the ZF-2 project was never completed. So ultimately, the version of the ship that you see in-game is an interpretation of this design. It features 5 128mm guns mounted in 4 turrets. You may find that the ZF-6's armament called for the use of 5 127mm guns. It is a near guarantee that if this ship had been completed, she would have been completed with the standard 12.7cm SKC-37 artillery that you see on a lot of other German ships. In-game, though, this ship features a gun designated the KM-40. Like the ZF-6 itself, this is also an armament that never quite fully exists. The KM-40 was intended to be the naval version of the 12.8cm 61 Flak 40, which some people may recognize as the gun in the Flakzwilling 40. When mounted in a pair, the Flak 40 was one of the most fierce anti-aircraft systems of the later war, and featured heavily in the defense of major urban and industrial centers. It was also capable of elevating to an impressive 88 degrees and firing a projectile as far as 12.5 miles vertically. That is 1/4 of the distance to space, and well above the distances where planes actually fly. The naval mount would have been able to elevate to 80 degrees, which meant at least the gun itself would have at least the elevation and rate of fire to effectively defend itself against just about any air attack. The actual projectile of the KM-40 is 127mm, just like the ubiquitous 12.7cm SKC-34 that we similarly have labeled as a 128mm gun in the game. The bores of both of these guns is actually 1 millimeter larger than the shell diameter, which I think is what's causing the problem there. Similarly, the 5.5 centimeter 77 caliber Goret 58 never finished development, so what we see in the game is something of a best case scenario or a relatively optimistic refit rendition of the ship that would have likely made it a pretty solid escort destroyer, which also somewhat optimistically assumes that it would have something to escort, but the Odin does have the Goret 58s on it also, so maybe that. The location of the turrets is a bit different than what you might find on some designs that I was able to locate for the ship, which more or less puts the middle turret where the target director is right now. I can't say if this is a creative decision or if it's that Wargaming simply has more resources than I do. That's certainly the case. In any case, I don't think it's specifically the end of the world. As for the ZF-6, or ZF-2 at that point, like most of the other Laardi-class destroyers, she was scuttled by her owners, this time the Germans, upon another invasion of France, this time the Allies, continuing in a grand tradition that basically lasted all of the war. The ZF-6 has a reputation for being a fairly challenging destroyer to play on PC. I'm not sure that it earns that exactly on Legends though. The things that make her a bit more challenging are, first and foremost, her speed. Traveling around at just 35 knots is not exactly fast, and you're tied with a bunch of Japanese destroyers for being some of the slowest ships that you'll find at the tier. Her weapons can present a problem if you're not intentional about how you use them. They are not incredible in terms of their range, and the HE damage is low, and frankly the AP has pretty terrible penetration characteristics. That said, they also have really potent upper end potential, with the AP damage able to dish out some pretty impressive sustained DPM, the improved HE penetration, and some very fast torpedoes. This is also in addition to having access to what is probably rightly considered the win button in the form of main battery reload booster that will make her AP or HE shells quite a bit better than any other destroyer in the game for 15 seconds. The other two items of note: this is a German destroyer, and you should note the lack of sonar as a consumable, and though most of us will probably think that this will be a gunboat destroyer, the truth of the matter is she's somewhere kind of in the middle. To me, this really is going to mean that the range of people who may enjoy this could be pretty much anyone that doesn't mind a fairly slow destroyer, because your commander choice will very much shape the experience that you have in this ship. This is mostly because I would characterize this as your basic B student in both torpedo and gun categories. So with that, we might as well talk about the three historic commanders that are available to you and why all three of them are actually very competitive, viable options. Starting with the torpedo boat commander, Maximilian von Spee, this isn't actually how I thought this ship would be run. That said, he can increase the range of these torpedoes to at least 9.2 kilometers, depending on your other choices, which isn't exactly extremely long range, but at speeds of 79 knots, or again, potentially better, they are quite dangerous. These selections will bar you from getting perceptive though, and along with the decreased efficiency of your guns, that puts you at a relative disadvantage versus other gunboat destroyers. Smart play and effective use of your main battery reload booster can more than make up for this, and I have had actually most of my best games playing this ship in this configuration. The commander that I will probably use more often though is Eric Bai, who has all of the gunboat options that you would want in a dedicated hunter-killer. He will grant you the fastest firing guns with potentially the best range and damage. He also has access to both twist and track as well as perceptive. And the question here is really, what do you think is going to be more useful to you? Better turret rotation or a little extra survivability? And both options here are good for very different reasons. His fourth slot doesn't really offer you much that is worthwhile, and there's not much to help you here with maneuverability either, but it's a happy convenience That buy just happens to come with the most useful trait for any destroyer, leaving you with plenty of opportunities to make your 2 inspiration choices more freely. Finally, though Reinhardt Scheer is the base commander, he's got 2 considerable advantages over the other 2 commanders, which might make him attractive for you. For one, he can raise the fire chance of the ZF-6 by 2%, which isn't a lot, but it is noticeable. The second, probably more important thing, is that you get a second win button by using fully packed, and I feel that's why you'd probably be looking at this. You pick up an extra speed boost and smoke screen along the way, which is nice, sometimes, I guess. But this is a high risk-reward kind of play, because your engine and rudder will be at risk from being knocked out in ways that you typically don't experience in the other 2 commanders, thanks to skills like Unstoppable. Also, though you will pick up a few odds and ends with additional range, speed, or rudder shift here, you don't have access to Perceptive, so just be warned. But I will reiterate, the ZF-6 can play very nicely with any of these options. Next, we come to statistics. The numbers that you will see here on screen are numbers that come with the base ship, with the exception of concealment, which includes the camouflage that does come with the ship. First is survivability, and the ZF-6 is not an exceptional student here. I would give her about a C- because she's slightly below average in terms of her HP pool. This is about 1200 less than average, not a lot, but twice that below the Z-23. It's not a serious handicap unless you take Von Spee with Fragile Threat, but you do kind of know what you're getting into if you choose that kind of skill. There is nothing extraordinary about her armor profile, which should basically convey the standard destroyer understanding, which is if you get hit, you're probably going to take damage. Speaking about artillery, you have what is labeled as 5 128mm main battery guns. They're in 1 2-gun turret forward, a super firing pair aft, and 1 amidships. They have reasonably good firing arcs, all of them, and impressively quick reload at just 4 seconds, though they do have an average turret rotation at 18 seconds. If you hit something with the high explosive, this 14,500 damage is the lowest at the tier, but it is German HE, meaning that you get 1/4 penetration rather than the normal 1/6. This penetration advantage will help you, particularly against cruisers and tier 6 battleships. The 6% fire chance, even with a high rate of fire, does not make you an exactly exceptional fire starter, but if you do bump this up to 8% with Scheer, you'd be above average. Most likely, against a cruiser that's showing you broadside, you may want to consider using the armor penetration shells. They have a very respectable 2950 damage, and that makes this a really high damage per minute ship. One thing to keep in mind though is that this AP has good damage, but has really poor penetration. So you'll probably want to aim upper belt or superstructure on most cruiser targets. Your next set of weapons are, of course, your torpedoes. You have 2 sets of 4 and 2 launchers. These reload at a respectable 90 seconds, but travel at a blazing fast 75 knots, which is only 1 knot slower than the Udachi's Screamer torpedoes. Though this 8-kilometer range is below average, you do have an advantage over that Udachi in terms of having longer range in spite of the high speed of your torpedoes. This 1.8 kilometer detectability is going to offer a little more reaction time, even with that good speed though, but it does make aiming the torpedoes fairly easy. Unlike Japanese torpedo boats that we have in game, you do only fairly average damage of 18,400 per torpedo, netting you an average damage per minute, which is right in the middle of the pack of Tier 7 destroyers. Since the 2020 Olympics are happening now in July of 2021, I would characterize this ship as being the bronze medalist for AA at Tier 7, at least among destroyers. You achieve this with no short-range AA, with everything picking up around 3 kilometers and reaching out as far as 5.2. Still, since you lag behind both the Akizuki and Fletcher, as much as the guns on this ship should really be fierce AA, And as much as the game may be telling you that this is incredible, it's probably not really worth it to spend a lot of effort on this unless carriers become significantly more popular. I've already said that you are tied for the second slowest destroyer at the tier, but there you go. I've said it again. All the ships that are equal to you or slower are Japanese. Everything else is faster, but I think it's safe to say with engine boost, you may have a situational advantage here over the Lightning in terms of speed. But your turning circle and rudder shift are very much normal, meaning that you are basically not incredible, and other than being a bit on the slow side, I have nothing else to say here. The ZF-6 shares the same sea detectability as the Z-23 and Kagero. This makes her a fairly stealthy boy, that doesn't make sense, with about 100 meter advantage from both sea and air. When firing from smoke, you have a 2.6 kilometer detection, which is easily remembered as it is exactly the same as what you'll find in the Fletcher. When we come to consumables, you have, of course, a damage control, nothing special here. Then you have a choice. You can either go out there with 2 German smokes or 1 defensive fire AA consumable. German smoke is notoriously not the strong suit of German DDs. It has a shorter duration and a still lengthy recharge time. That said, it will break contact with the enemy if that's what you really need, and as bad as this may be made out to be, it's not exactly as though it lasts 3 seconds. On the other hand, you can choose DFAA. This is not really a good idea, in part because you only get 1 of these, and the carrier is going to start with 4 or maybe 6 invincibility buttons. Plus, though you have a pretty good AA for a destroyer, even with this active and all of your DPM doubled, the amount of firepower this puts out would still make you a below average cruiser. Now, your flak is going to help you considerably, but unless this is at least 3 charges of this, I would say this is a really, really weak choice, and it's really closer to a non-option than anything else. Next, you have a speed boost. Unfortunately, this is not a French speed boost because that would be awesome. So this is just 8%, nothing really special here, but then you have what you really, really want. Main battery reload booster. I tend to call this the win button, as I've said before, and it will temporarily double your rate of fire. This makes the ZF-6 at least for 15 seconds, the highest DPM destroyer at the tier right now, and it's really the trick up its sleeve that is going to make this ship most attractive to people who want to participate in this campaign. If you're playing against one of these though, particularly if you're in a Royal Navy destroyer, if you see one of these firing every other second, it's a good time to maybe smoke up and turn out. And since you only come with 1 of these, well, you better make it count. And last, and actually kind of certainly least, we're going to come to the gameplay. We're going to be on Trident. The game's going to start here pretty quick. You will see that I am using 1 version of RPF. I am using Twist and Track on this, and my commander here is Eric Vi. As you can see, we've made some choices here. One of the reasons why I've chosen to go with the Twist and Track is because I've chosen the main battery modification in slot 4, which does slow your turrets down a little bit. It's certainly functional without it, but this is a slightly more comfortable experience. With Twist and Track, you probably do have the ability to kind of take your time with your turrets in a lot of situations, but not all. In any case, we have 3 destroyers on the enemy team, and by 3 I do mean 4. We will be looking out for them. In any case, the other choices that I've made here are pretty in line with what you would normally make in terms of trying to play a fairly stealthy boy and also trying to be reasonably good at dealing with enemy destroyers. That is still something I think that the ZF-6 can do, and it's how I like to play my destroyers, but there are going to be a couple of things that we're going to hit on along the way. This is far from my most effective game, but it does give you a good idea of what this ship is good at, and maybe some of the things that it's not so good at. For a moment, we jump there into the first-person view on our torpedoes. Everybody knows what's coming next if you've seen some of my videos, but that is available just on preset numbers 1 and 2. I use preset 2 because I am old-fashioned. In any case, we have missed with most of our torpedoes there at the beginning. We also do a fairly not fantastic 13,694 damage after all of the rounding, and don't manage to walk away with a flood. I think that's probably because we just barely got his torpedo protection, and honestly, these torpedoes don't do enough damage to score floods 100% of the time when you hit somebody. For a moment there, we were kind of stalking backwards a little bit to see if we could get these torpedoes off before he slipped behind the island. It looks like he's going ham, though, so we launch our torpedoes around the other side, and I'm sorry, buddy, but that's probably going to be game for you. Even though we give him kind of a long time to react due to the very high visibility of the torpedoes, you can see, obviously, if you're shooting at a broadside battleship, the speed does make a difference, and he does not have a lot of time to get out of the way of any of those. We bury almost every single one right into the side of a ship, and obviously he is going back to port. Now, with that out of the way, we're going to go look for some other trouble. You can see we have a Massachusetts coming right through the middle of the map as well. And even without using anything to kind of offset the amount of time it takes to get these torpedoes to reload, you can see they're pretty quick. 90-second base. Can certainly do a lot better if you want to build into them, which is one reason why this ship is kind of nice. You can make a respectable torpedo boat out of it and still have just enough raw firepower with the main battery reload booster and these guns to at least be reasonably dangerous in a knife fight, though your guns will suffer if you do choose to build like that. Kind of hoping that last one catches him, but it's an optical illusion or perspective or whatever you want to say. We're not real keen on jumping out in front of a Massachusetts because the Massachusetts has more than often reasonably respectable secondaries. Our detectability with this particular build is 4.9, so we can get pretty close to him, but obviously he has passed into that, though we are a German ship with some not so incredible smoke. We get our smoke generator up there. Now we can fire at our heart's content until he gets to 2.6 kilometers. Now, in spite of the excellent penetration that you usually get on German guns, you can see against the front of a battleship, you're still going to have not a lot to shoot at. That's why I'm kind of aiming high. Unfortunately, I'm also aiming at the OP conning tower, and that doesn't quite work. There is another German destroyer. He is a little bit far away from me, but as you see, when we come out of this smoke screen, we've got this Vulcan here, and we're going to immediately start shooting at him. I would pay attention to the mini-map. He is a little bit too angled in order for me to consistently land good shots on him. Now he's turning back around because I think he's got his guns working on us. We're going to quickly switch over to the armor penetration, and activate our main battery reload booster. Now, I will point out, as soon as we do that, you can kind of see how much we can chunk even a destroyer for using AP. The key there was waiting until he showed enough broadside or a shallow enough angle that I could consistently do something other than just bounce off of him. Since these don't have particularly good penetration, these AP shells are actually quite useful against other destroyers. If a destroyer is actively maneuvering, then it might just be safer to go ahead and stick to the HE. It's not great because you actually will do less damage there in a lot of cases than you will even on an over-penetration for the AP. Now with just this one ship left, you're going to watch me kind of get to our top speed. With this configuration, we're just a little bit under 39 knots, which is, again, not very fast. And with the Champagne, if it was really actually trying to run away from me, it could. Champagne is a very fast ship, and it has a much better engine boost than I do. Now we're considering that he may turn back towards the middle. We've got a whole bunch of other gunboats here drawing a lot of attention, so we're feeling pretty good about our lives. So maybe we'll join in too. This shows you that that middle turret actually does have a pretty aggressive angle forward. It actually traverses towards the front of the ship, which is a minor bonus that I like. And actually I can get all of my guns onto the target, even at this kind of angle, which is nice. The short range of our torpedoes means we can't quite shoot him yet. There's a little bit of a demonstration on the amount of shatters you're going to get if you do shoot a lot of HE at Tier 7 battleships. We decide not to do that. We're going to go ahead and use the AP since he's already burning. And you can see each one of these volleys is doing in the area of 2,000 damage. One of them was close to 2,400. That's it. Not an incredible match, but this does kind of show what this ship is good at. You've got, obviously, the very fast torpedoes, and we get to see, at least on a couple of different targets, why you want to kind of work that AP in when you can. My closing thoughts on it: I was pretty unimpressed with this ship at first. After a couple games and getting more used to and more intentional about working AP into my shell selection, it actually has been growing on me quite a bit. Also, my tendency is not to fire a ton of torpedoes, so like if you're listening to what I'm saying, I was trying to play this like a Fletcher, and that's not going to exactly work quite so well. But since this ship actually sits pretty much in the middle of the gunboat and torpedo boat world with possible advantages in either direction, it's best to neither play this like an attack dog from hell, nor the ultra passive, ponderous Japanese torpedo boat. Figure that you can hold your own against either a torpedo boat or another gunboat, and then just lean a little bit in either direction based on your commander selection. I think this will be a boat that most people enjoy who can get over its not exactly impressive speed. In any case, those are just my thoughts on the ZF-6. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and as always, I hope to see you on the next one.